Welcome to This Week in Habsland. I am Jordan, he is Brian, and we are here today to discuss your playoff-bound Montreal Canadiens. After really putting us through the ringer, Brian, over the past week and a half, the Canadiens punched their ticket to the postseason after defeating that Carolina Hurricanes. And we are here now to discuss maybe the first part of the episode a bit on the Habs making it to the postseason, closing the chapter on the regular season for now, and then moving our way into what awaits us starting Monday, thankfully, not Sunday, with the Washington Capitals. So, Brian, the Canadiens missed the playoffs for 3 years in a row. 2021 was the last time they were there. This is the first time they have qualified without any weird division, short season, COVID playoff stuff for reals since 2017, which is wild. What was going through your head when you were watching the game and it was becoming a reality that the Canadiens were making the playoffs? And what was the moment where you were like, okay, I can relax now, they're in?
When Evans hit the empty net, that's when I started relaxing. It was not until the very, very end, Jordan, because I've seen them poop the bed too many times in clinching opportunities in the past couple weeks. So it really did take till the end of the wire. Kind of amazing that it's a 3-year drought only, considering where we were a mere 3 years ago. Getting Slavkovsky, drafting him first overall after the worst season in Montreal Canadiens history, basically. There's some other ones that are like on par, but you can't really tell because of the overtime loss points that exist now versus not existing then. So it's hard to actually quantify which season was worse, but like definitely the worst in recent memory. The first team to ever end 30 seconds.
It was really bad. It was really bad. Like, we don't have to underscore it with any kind of qualifiers. Of course. It sucked. 22 was terrible.
Yeah, no doubt about that. Also, I love that they punched their ticket themselves.
Yeah.
All week I was dreading Columbus, going down in OT or losing a game flat out. And that's what would get the Montreal Canadiens into the playoffs. And I didn't want that. I wanted them to punch the ticket themselves, which they did, which I think is fantastic. And they did it in regulation, which is great too. Like, they could have done it by just getting to overtime and losing, but they didn't. They won the game, and that's big.
So I have two general ideas that have kind of been floating around my head. One is this team feels like 6 to 8 months ahead of schedule, at least. And I think I haven't done a basketball analogy in a while, so let's do this. 2014, the Toronto Raptors, that 2013-14 season, they were supposed to suck. They were supposed to tank, kind of reset. They don't. They become very good, and they actually make the playoffs. What the Raptors marketing team was in the process of doing during that season was getting ready to reboot the franchise the following season in terms of the marketing. And that's when the We the North stuff was supposed to come live, was during the 2014-15 season of, okay, this is the team now. We the North, we're rebranding. We have Drake. Everything's great. But that team the year before, 2013-14, got so good. They made the playoffs and they decided we have to relaunch the brand now. We have to do it in the postseason. So We the North actually debuted in the 2014 playoffs.
Interesting.
And that wasn't the plan. And I feel like, forget the branding stuff, but like for the Habs, that's what this kind of feels like. It felt like next year it was supposed to be Demidov comes in October. Reinbacher will be ready in the fall. Jacob Fowler will be in Laval doing his thing. And now you look around and it's April, 6 months before that, and things have kind of already gone in motion. And now the team's made the playoffs. Like, we've talked about how this team might not be your prototypical 8th seed. They're probably not as good as a typical 8th seed. But it doesn't, like, this year in this Eastern Conference, they were the 8th best team, and thus they made the playoffs. And now they're going to get this incredible experience going forward.
Yep.
So, and this, we've talked about the front office is not going to lose the forest for the trees here and get content with being this type of team. They know they need to still get much, much better.
Of course.
But that's been kind of in my mind. The other thing is the last 7 goals scored, with the exception of Jake Evans and the empty netter. No, all due respect to Jake Evans. We're going to talk about him a lot today. The last 7 goals that this team scored that mattered on a goalie: Nick Suzuki, Alex Newhook, Ivan Demidov, Juraj Slavkovsky, Caden Gooley, Nick Suzuki, Caden Gooley. All the young guys brought it.
Wow.
All the young guys, right? There's 2 Suzukis, 2 Gooleys, Newhook, Demidov, and Slav.
And missing a young sniper, Cole Caulfield.
Yeah, I mean, Slav stole one of the Caulfield goals.
Yeah, that's true. That was pretty much theft. Wow, that's fascinating. It's all the young dudes contributing.
And that's what it kind of felt like in the Carolina game, where, and we don't have to stick on this game for too long, but it was the young guys. That first line was back. They were back in their 1A, prime stake, top tier performance. Juraj Slavkovsky had one of his best games of the season. He was so effectively physical, which I don't know if I've ever used that term before, but he was being so smart with how to use the body on the boards to separate man from puck, like we talked about last year. And it's weird, like he finished with more points than he did last season. It still feels like he was more singularly dominant in the back half of last season compared to this season, but it doesn't mean he didn't get better. It doesn't mean he wasn't playing good hockey. And he was probably, I think, their best player on Wednesday night against the Hurricanes. I mean, Gouli, obviously, like Gouli, first of all, has the great quote that, morning of the Carolina game of saying it's do or die for us. We don't want to wait until tomorrow to see the results. We just want to get her done, which is like, I don't know why he's bringing up Larry the Cable Guy quote in there. Like, Gouli, you were like 3 years old when that show was on. Yeah. So, but those guys brought it. Gouli was awesome.
Yeah.
Slavkovsky was awesome. Like, we're all talking about Hudson and Suzuki and obviously Demidov. And then there's these other two guys who are like, don't forget about us. We're still here. We're still budding superstars. I thought that was really cool to see that the young guys were like, let's do this. Let's go. We're bringing this team to the playoffs. And it wasn't the vets.
Yep. I completely agree with you. I think the oldest of the prime contributors was Sam Montembeault.
Yep.
And he's 28. Not slighting Brendan Gallagher or Jake Evans, who's also 28.
Yeah.
By saying that, Monty was just on another level with these young kids. So let's throw him into the discussion as well. But that's amazing. On the topic of the team getting better and management not stagnating and just keeping status quo, do you also find it incredible that this team with basically no second line all season is in the playoffs among 32 teams? Half the teams make it, and a team with basically no second line made it. And I'm trying to wrap my head around it, especially considering that the third and fourth line were not consistent either.
Yeah, no, I'm happy you mentioned that too. Yeah, because the bottom six, as much as we love them and they work their butts off, consistency is not their thing. Although that fourth line, we saw that spark again suddenly.
Yes.
Especially in the third period against Carolina.
Well, look who was back in. Yeah, exactly.
Heineman. Yeah, there was a bit of juice back with Heineman.
Yeah.
How did they do it? Look, it's superstar level play from Nick Suzuki, superstar level play from Lane Hudson. Your goaltending was fantastic the last 20 games or so. And then it's not a support cast, but like the guys right below in Caulfield and Slav and Gouli, they were all there contributing. The second line, like we're going to contrast the crap out of that with Washington, because Washington's second line might be the best in the league. How did they? I mean, look, the East is again. It was not super duper strong this year, but the Habs got in somehow. Individual performances, those last 25 games of the season. Honestly, I've looked at other guys around the league. Suzuki's finishing top 10 Selke, and he's going to finish top 5, maybe Lady Byng. Like, I'm very confident in both of those.
Yep.
Obviously, Lane Hudson's going to win the Calder. I was looking for some stupid reason. The Vezina is only a top 3 vote. There's no everyone else. You get 5 spots when you submit your ballot. The Vezina is only 3, so nothing for Monty. Not that 5 would make a difference for Monty.
Less goalies in the league than skaters. I think that's all it is.
Yeah, but it's fun to have 5 votes.
It would be fun. That's true.
Caulfield gets close to 40, doesn't quite get there.
Yep.
Slavkovsky back-to-back 50-point seasons. There's a lot to like from like the 6 or 7 youngest guys on the team, and add all of that together, and it's sometimes just enough to squeeze into the playoffs, which is exactly what they did.
What Lane Hudson did is unbelievable, tying Larry Murphy's assist record for a rookie all time. The very last time there was a 60 assist season by a defenseman for the Montreal Canadiens. Do you know when it was? Can you guess?
So I feel like it's obviously not going to be Subban or Markov, because otherwise you wouldn't be asking me this question. But I feel like both of those guys must have gone fairly close. That means we got to go further back. We don't have to go all the way back to Larry Robinson, do we?
We do. 85, 86. Wow. 39 years, man. He had 63 assists. And he was not a rookie. And he was not an effing rookie. Lane Hudson, you're a god. Score some more goals and you'll be on par with the best offensive defensemen that have ever played the game, man. He's a rookie, Jordan.
Yeah, it's just what he's done has just been he has blown our expectations out of the water. I go back into my notes and see what we were predicting about him at the beginning of the season. I feel so foolish. Not often do I feel so, I feel like I'm so off on a Canadian specific prediction, but like 4.5 on the Calder, like
Yeah.
brutal.
And usually when we're off, it's because we like the guy too much, so we end up thinking, Caulfield will get 40 this season.
Right.
That's just an example. He was very close, but usually we're above. Nobody could have predicted this, man. This success he had. If anybody did predict it, kudos to you, because wow. And then on Suzuki, the other guy that we talk about in that, like, who was the MVP of the Canadiens this year? Geez, that's a difficult discussion. Not quite as long ago, but the last time that anybody went point per game as a centerman was 95-96. Pierre Turgeon, Vincent Damphousse both had 96 points in the 95-96 season. So 29 seasons since a centerman did that. And Suzuki did it while being one of the most responsible and smart two-way centers in the entire game.
Yeah. On the point per game stuff, justice to Saku Koivu. For anyone who's not in the know, look at his sophomore season before he got injured. There was a point per game player hiding in there that 100%. Just never came back, unfortunately. One final thing on the team, on the celebration, on the enjoyment of holy smokes, this team's in the postseason. Martin St. Louis. This guy kind of plucked out of nowhere. I mean, we know who Martin St. Louis is, but in terms of coaching chops, it was a pretty bold hire from Kent Hughes and Jeff Gordon to bring him in mid-season too, and kind of instill his mindset into the team. And you saw it from quotes from Gallagher post-game on Wednesday of like, look, it starts with Marty. It starts with him. He is still, like he was a leader in a NHL dressing room for 15, 20 years. It's not surprising that he can still connect with guys nowadays. He has grown a lot as a coach. I think his like superpower has always been being able to communicate with players. Like he's able to understand it. I think there's an obvious respect level with players right now when they see St. Louis and they talk with him. But he's also been a really good like one-on-one guy. Like stories last season of Juraj Slafkovsky saying, like I only talk to Marty. Marty's the sometimes like the assistant coaches, there's an offensive one or the defensive one, usually get like pointed to one person or another for development within the season. St. Louis was the guy that was assigned to Slav to block out all the noise. And I think you're seeing it very much still in the game, that there's still very little small coaching moments where he just talks to people and puts people on the side and say, hey, let's talk about this. That has always been his number one strength. The X's and O's are getting there. There's still some stuff that I don't love, but he's figuring that part out bit by bit by bit. But as a communicator, as a motivator, that's always been there. And now he's really being able to lean into that. And now that there's a quality team in front of him, or quality enough, we're getting to see what a St. Louis team can do when they have that talent.
To go back to his starting point, he was coaching, 15, 16-year-olds basically prior to doing this. Jordan, you and I coached U14 and U16 soccer in our college years. Would you have felt comfortable being plucked out of there and being like, hey, go coach Man U, go coach Tottenham? No, of course not. That's craziness. Also, neither one of us played professionally, but still, like that's basically what happened from a coaching perspective. So unreal. No Jack Adams, obviously. The team is not good enough for that.
He'll get votes.
He'll absolutely get votes.
Yeah. I know you were joking about Tottenham and Man U. Those are two fun teams to bring up in this example, given their existing seasons.
I don't know soccer, Jordan.
That would be a different podcast.
I may or may not have Googled prominent soccer teams for this. And actually, no, that's not even true. Man U is a favorite team of a buddy of ours, Santi. So I'll give him a little shout out. That's why I chose them.
A buddy who may have complained that this episode of the podcast is coming out a day later than he would have preferred. I think with that, Brian, we can close the chapter on the regular season for now. We're obviously going to come back to it, celebrate the season as a whole, do our usual end of year awards.
Yeah.
But the year is not over. There's a playoff round to talk about, at least one. So, like in 2010, an 8th seeded Montreal Canadiens are going to storm the Capitol. I shouldn't use that phraseology anymore. And play the number 1 seed, Washington Capitals, led by Captain Alex Ovechkin. Different times, different teams. So here's where we can start with this, Brian. Well, first of all, I will say, I will take some credit in saying I thought Washington had a really good offseason, and I thought they were a good team to make the playoffs and get in as a wild card probably. I did not foresee 108 points or whatever they ended up getting. However, despite that, during the season, throughout the season, we've talked about it, I don't totally believe in them as a true 1 seed. Quite frankly, if we are power ranking the entire NHL right now, I'm not sure they would enter the top 5 for me.
Wow. Okay.
You know, I know Dallas is like super slumping right now, as maybe one of us had predicted. Winnipeg, Colorado, Tampa, Florida. I don't know what to say about Toronto. Like, I don't know who can tell me who has more postseason success between Toronto and this Washington team.
Yeah.
You know, so there's an argument basically that they're not actually a top 5 team. Now, the problem is, Brian, the Canadiens are not your usual 8 seed. I think we'll dive into the numbers. They're a bit worse than your usual 8 seed.
Yep.
So, despite the fact that it's a weaker number 1 overall Eastern Conference team, Habs are a bit weaker than that. Despite that, overall impressions on what you think about the Washington Capitals and where you kind of see the series going. Again, we can dive in and on the numbers, we can dive in on the matchups. Tell me where you want to start it.
So I'll start just by saying, like, I'm looking at their lineup, their pairings, their trios, their goaltenders, and even knowing what Ovechkin accomplished this year, knowing that Strome was a point per game and that Dubois found his game and that McMichael came out of nowhere and was astoundingly good, and Thompson, holy crow, what a good goalie until very recently, and Protas and Wilson still there, and like I look up and down this lineup, and still, despite all that, I'm like, this is not a number 1 lineup. So I agree with you as well in terms of the quality of the team still being number 1, but they did absolutely get the results. But what I'm, I guess, trying to assess is how did they do it? The energy of getting Ovechkin to the big number is monstrous. And like Thompson being a really, really darn good goaltender for most of the season, that had a huge part of it. But like, what do you see here as being, what is the reason that they got to where they are, whether they deserve to be or not? Like what got them there?
So the short answer is really good goaltending for most of the season and ridiculous finishing. That has been the secret to their success, to becoming the number 1 seed, to becoming a playoff team. There's obviously other stuff that they've been doing, but that's the shortest answer possible. We can go dive into some of the numbers here, and I've kind of broken them out in terms of full season and post 4 Nations. I feel like saying the full season data set for the Capitals is more relevant than it is for the Canadiens. And in contrast, for the Canadiens, it's more important what they did post 4 Nations. So when I'm going to be giving kind of the rankings of various different things, and I have both sets of numbers, but with the Capitals, it's the full season, because these last 10, 12 games or so for them, they have been coasting completely. And we can talk about whether that matters, but for all intents and purposes, full season Caps, post 4 Nations for the Canadiens. Power play. This is net power play, so that includes the shorthanded stuff. 10th for the Capitals, 20th for the Canadiens. Penalty kill, 6th for the Capitals, 15th for the Canadiens. Shot attempt percentage, 10th Capitals, 29th Montreal. We'll get back to that. That's St. Louis teams have just not ever really had the puck. 5-on-5 save percentage, 19th for Washington, which I thought was lower than I would have anticipated. 8th for the Canadiens post 4 Nations. So there's the first time we were really seeing the Canadiens have a big gap in terms of where they are better. 5-on-5 shooting percentage. Capitals are number 1 in the NHL all season. They have dipped a little bit recently, but again, I don't know what to talk about, how to figure out these last 25 games. Canadiens 10th in the NHL, so some pretty good finishing on their end. Those are the big categories. I do want to dive in a bit more into the power play and the penalty kill, but overall what we're seeing is the Capitals are pretty good. They have a lot, it's the shooting percentage, which has been number 1 in the NHL at 5-on-5. And you can look at it, right? Their entire top 6 is shooting at least 14%.
Wow.
Right? So Alexei Protas is at 21%. Dylan Strome is just under 20%. I believe Tom Wilson is just under 20. Ovi's at 18.5. And then you have to go, I think Dubois is at 14.5, and so is McMichael. For reference, Suzuki is just over 16%, or sorry, 17%. So he'd be 5th if he was on the Capitals among their forwards.
Wow.
Just for reference in terms of they've really had good finishing this year.
And Suzuki's always the guy that we look at as selecting his shots incredibly carefully.
Yeah, so that's the thing. Maybe there's a few things I've kind of laid out here. Maybe we can go with the special teams. Let's isolate that. I want to come back to the shooting percentage stuff and really that Caps top 6, which I think it's special. From a special teams perspective, again, Caps 10th and 6th power play penalty kill. Canadiens post 4 Nations 20th and 15th. Not super great. what's very interesting about this, and this is, I wanted to have this conversation because it's going to be the postseason. Everyone talks about the refereeing, putting the whistles away, all that good stuff. What's really interesting in this specific series is both these teams are great at drawing penalties and just terrible at taking penalties. So for instance, if we can use the same full season stats here, but like in terms of penalties drawn post Four Nations, Washington is third, the Canadiens are seventh. This is per 60, so it's prorated for all that stuff. So both teams are top 10 in the NHL in drawing penalties. These are minor penalties, these are not offsetting, these are not fighting majors.
Yeah.
In terms of penalties taken since the Four Nations, the Montreal Canadiens are 25th, which is bad, right? We want to be high on this list. It's in reverse order.
Of course. Yeah.
The Washington Capitals are dead last at 32nd. So you draw a lot of penalties, you take a lot of penalties. That means a lot of power plays, a lot of special teams, which, as we've said, is kind of favoring the Capitals here. So a typical question, Brian, you're going to say is, yeah, but it's the postseason, right?
Yeah. I mean, my feeling has always been like the refs put the whistles away in the postseason.
So this is an article that came out in 2023 in The Athletic. Read it then, read it again this morning. It's amazing. And it really paints a more fulsome picture of like, do referees really like swallow the whistle? So at a high level, basically what happens is, believe it or not, and most people are going to be like, no, I don't believe this. More penalties are called, minor penalties and stuff like that, in the postseason than in the regular season. So it's about a 7% increase in the percentage of penalties called in the postseason compared to the regular season. This data set, by the way, is 2016 through 2022. It's a big sample. It's 7 seasons. Okay. Now you might say, but wait a second, there's overtime. And that's going to skew the numbers a bit. Sure. So there's 3% more minutes in the postseason per game than the regular season, yet there's still a 7% increase in the percentage of penalties taken. So that's immediately debunked. Penalties do go up. And now you're saying, well, what the hell? That's not what I've been watching my whole life. When I am watching big Game 6 conference final, Game 7, Florida, Edmonton, I'm not seeing a damn penalty. I might see one, and that's about it. And I should mention, like, the average is like between 3 and 3.2 power plays per game. So what they did in this article, and it's a really good analysis, is they tracked the relative power play opportunities. So the difference between that specific game and the average for each game of a series per round. So all game 1, round 1 is one data point. Game 1 or game 2, round 1 and onwards to game 7 Stanley Cup final. And what they found is that the difference, like the increase in power play opportunities because of more penalties drawn, is largely concentrated early in the playoff series, and even more specifically, early in the playoffs. So games 1, 2, 3, and 4 of the first round, and that's what's most important here, see anywhere from 0.4 to 0.7 more power play opportunities per game on average in a regular season game. Game 5 is basically the same as you would see in the regular season. And then, unsurprisingly, I guess, game 6 and 7, it craters. They stop calling penalties.
Right.
Second round, it kind of flips again, right? Where it's like, here it's statistically, it's games 2, 3, and 4. Huge increase. 5 and game 1 and game 5, not so much. Game 6 and 7, again, it just tanks. No penalties called. Conference final, game 1, it shoots up again. Then the rest of the conference final, it's almost like linear in a decreasing fashion where it's less and less and less. And again, game 6 and 7, that's where the huge decrease comes, and it just craters to the point where it's an average of 1 less power play opportunity per game on average. Cup final, again, game 1, game 2, it's a bit more than average, craters afterwards. So ultimately what we're seeing is there's a high concentration of extra penalties called in the first 4 games of the first round, and then maybe the first 3 games of the second round, and then maybe just game 1 and 2 of the third round, and maybe just the first game of the cup final. And then from that point onwards, it's just way downhill and so many less power plays called, especially games 6 and 7. So with that said, is this going to, like, what does that mean for the first round? What does that mean for this? Where we're saying, okay, we think the Caps have an advantage at special teams. Both teams take and draw a crap load of penalties. And I've presented this to you, Brian. So where's your head at with it?
Is this going to be a series probably in the entire playoffs where we see the most amount of penalties? It very well could be the way that both of these teams take and draw a lot of penalties. And then seeing Line versus Ovechkin
Mm.
in their offices will be incredible as well. That'd be a really cool kind of showdown. Not that Line has done anything on the power play of late at all. Around the time, I guess, 3 weeks ago, when I was gearing up to do those stats about like the last time that a Canadian centerman went point per game, the last time a 60 assist season happened for a defenseman for the Canadiens. I also had one the last time any NHL player scored 1/3 as many power play goals as they played games. It's never happened in history, and Line was on pace for it. And then 12 games go by and he doesn't do anything. So bye-bye to that fun stat. But if he could pick it up again, him versus Ovi in a power play blast from the top of the circle battle, same exact spot, they're going to wear out that patch in the ice for sure. So that could be fascinating. But the Habs would have to refigure out their power play.
So that's the thing. Overall, the power play, I believe it's something like 3 for 30 or 3 for 31 in its last 13 or 14 games. Not going into the playoffs on a hot streak, very much kind of like the third line is. So it does seem like there's going to be power play opportunities, especially early in the series if past this prologue. The big question is going to be like, are we going to see changes to the power play one specifically? And we kind of saw St. Louis tinker a little bit with how much ice time he is designated from one to the other, because now with power play 2, Suzuki's still out there and Demidov is out there. So you have 40% of what is essentially would be your best power play. And I wonder if maybe the change is not quite change the formation, not the formation, but change the personnel on power play 1, and maybe just pluck in Lane Hudson on power play 2 and just say Hudson and Suzuki are going to double shift it. And we have Demidov out there with Gallagher and Newhook. And maybe that's the change. I'm just trying to think, like, power play has been bad for quite a bit now, and you're going to need it.
Yeah,
like, it cannot go ice cold.
Yeah.
So what else would you see, like, if it's 2 games into the series and they're 0 for 7? What can you do?
I could see if the second line is generating more chances, which at times this season has absolutely been the case, despite the really high level skill on that first unit. There are times where they pass the puck in the peripheries and whiff on a shot and don't get anything done in like a minute 24. And then they change because the opposition dumped the puck for the 4th time. And then the second unit comes out, and in those 36 seconds that are left, they get 2 or 3 shots on net. So I would see Marty not necessarily changing personnel, like you said. I don't think he'll extend Lane Hudson's ice time as much as I think that's interesting. I think they need him at 5-on-5 too much for that. He's playing too much. You don't want to give those extra minutes to Matheson or Savard, but like whoever else. I want Hudson to have those 5-on-5 minutes. What I think might happen is instead of a minute 25, maybe it goes down to a minute 10. And then if they're really not performing, minute each. You know, maybe you start hearing the sound of the door rattling at the Canadiens bench after the 3rd dump when they haven't gotten a shot yet. That's what I would like to see. It's accountability first and foremost. It's okay, if you're not going to perform, then we're going to put out a line who might. But also it gives you a better opportunity to win, and it also tells those guys, oh, we only have a minute. Okay, let's shoot the puck. Because at times, like, they're looking for the perfect opportunity, which, fair enough, sometimes the perfect opportunity can exist. And at the beginning of the season, they were getting lots of them. But now other teams have researched their power play. They know how it works. They know how it functions. They know where guys go, where the passing lanes are, where the dangerous areas are. Hint, hint, it's Line A in his spot. So with them knowing all that, some type of change is definitely necessary. And it could just be a temporal change. You get a little bit less time. Use it to shoot now. And other than that, I don't see them giving Demidov the nod just yet. I know last episode we said that that's the one that he belongs on the first unit as early as next season. I just think if you've done this sort of status quo thing all year, it would be, maybe this is too sentimental, but it would be a crappy thing to do to either Line or Slavkovsky after they did have reasonable success for good stretches during the regular season. I mean, Line is another part of the reason that we're in the playoffs at all. There were several games that were decided by 1, if not 2 of his power play goals.
But this is playoffs. This is the tough decision. Are you going with the guys that brought you here, or are you going to go with the guy that's hot?
Yeah.
And that's I'm happy we answered the Matheson Hudson question early in the year, so we don't have to have the discussion right now.
Yeah.
On Demidov, is he the number 1 pick in terms of wild cards in this draft, in this series?
Yeah. I don't see anybody else who would come close. I want to look at Washington's lineup again to see if I'm missing. Oh no, it's Lars Eller, man. Come on, it's Lars Eller. No, it's
Playoff.
It has
Playoff
to be.
Eller's a thing.
Playoff Eller is absolutely a thing. He's similar to playoff Lehkonen. I think if Thompson figures his stuff out, that could be one. But he's not a wild card because he showed it all season. So no, it's Demidov. Of course it is.
So I think you were kind of actually onto something there. I think it's the health of Thompson and Protas if they're going to be ready and play for the beginning of the season, the series. That's kind of a big deal. As far as we know, Protas is still not skating. Now it's hockey, right? This guy could be in a cast in a hospital bed Monday morning and still suit up Monday night. So it's whatever.
Yeah.
Thompson, despite the fact that, look, let's say he is ready. From February onwards, he had an 877 save percentage and a 333 goals against. So it's not like he was some world, and that's 15 games of a season, which is about a third of the games he played, if I'm remembering correctly. It's not like he was some world beater. So there's the health factor and certainly the quality of play. And then Protas, just in terms of like, that guy's an absolute revelation this year. First 3 seasons in the NHL, just putting up peak like Victor Mete numbers. And then all of a sudden you turn around and he's bagging 30.
Right.
His health, I think, is a big wild card. But no, the answer is, I mean, I laid the groundwork, but like the answer is Demidov.
Yeah.
Because Demidov might be the most talented forward on the team. The question is like, and you saw it on Wednesday night, like he only played 10 minutes and 20 seconds against the Hurricanes. And I think just 2 shifts maybe in the third period. Like he played less and less as the game went on. And maybe it was just that third line with Line and Newhook was way too volatile in protecting a lead. And sure, fair enough. But even with that, Demidov had chances in the first period. And there's moments where you're like, oh, wow. There's a different level of skill on this team that you're just cackling on your couch because you can't believe he's doing what he's doing. And there's absolutely a possibility that Game 3, Demidov has 2 goals and an assist. And that was not on the board 3 weeks ago.
No,
at
of
all.
course not. No.
And I don't think there's anyone like Ryan Leonard's like I like that Ryan Leonard's going to be in this series because you and I loved him so much his draft year.
Yeah.
I don't think Ryan Leonard has that type of scalability the way Demidov might. He can still make a difference. And we said Leonard's going to be a postseason guy.
Yeah.
I don't know if it's this postseason.
Yeah.
But I think, it's Demidov with a bullet in terms of wild cards. And then I think it's the Protas injury. And then it's the goaltending across the board, I think would be the third wild card if I were picking.
That's a great answer, man. On Ryan Leonard compared to Demidov, it's the old archetype versus the new archetype for playoff performers. It's the Demidov being the new archetype of just incredible skill above all else, and Leonard being the, decent skill, very good player, but a bruiser, a guy who's going to forecheck really hard, and just somebody who's going to go balls to the wall all night long, the entire series. So. And back check very hard. I'm still gonna, I think I went too soft on Demidov for that lazy back check, Jordan. I know I called it out, but, I heard about it from a couple people the next day.
Good.
Like you could have hit him harder on that, which I definitely regret, because that was awful. Hopefully we never see it again. I think he learned his lesson, but, hopefully we never see that again, especially in the postseason. Oh my God. Can you imagine when a game's on the line?
Who knows? We are learning in real time what Demidov is as a hockey player in the NHL.
Yet another point on his wild cardness. Because it's
true.
not only the good; there's that too.
So on the opposite end of the wild cards is the things we know for sure. Let's dive in a bit on the Capitals before we slowly start wrapping it up and kind of coming up with our predictions. Let's start with the forward group. They're just incredibly balanced and have really strong depth. Like overall, I know I talked about like I basically called them a PDO team, which is basically like the 5-on-5 save percentage and the 5-on-5 shooting percentage. That's what PDO is. They're much more than that. That top 6 I talked about it, like the 14% shooting percentage. The Dylan Strome line, just truckloads of talent and finishing capability. Who steps in for Protas if he is hurt to start the series? It could be Ryan Leonard, but we'll see. And then the second line with Dubois and McMichael and Wilson, I think that might be the line that gives not the most trouble, but that might be the biggest differentiator. So just for comparison's sake, so it's typically it's been Strome with Protas, Alexi Protas on the right side and Ovechkin on the left side, and then it's Dubois, Wilson, and McMichael. In terms of goals per 60, unsurprisingly, the Strome line, their first line, 4.69 goals per 60. Dubois line, 4.03 goals per 60. Okay, makes sense that the first line scores at about 0.6 goals per 60 more.
Yep.
When you look at expected goals, it's actually flipped. It's 2.9 for the first line and 3.46 for the second line, which to me screams out that, I mean, part of it is like it's Ovechkin and Protas having a crazy year as well.
Yeah.
But that second line just creates nothing but opportunities, and they might just not have elite skill the way that first line had this year. But that second line is an incredible problem. They're big boys too, and they will be like, in terms of matchups, I think if I'm coaching Washington, that's what I'm putting up against Suzuki.
Interesting. I don't love that. I gotta say, I don't love that. I don't love the prospect of Tom Wilson.
100% it's Wilson.
Yeah, of course.
Wilson, if I were to guess, first shift that they can, and they can match lines if they want to, because they're going to obviously have home ice in 1 and 2.
Yeah.
It's that Dubois line on Suzuki line, and you have Wilson just finish every single check possible in that first period on Caulfield, on Hudson, on Demidov, but primarily it's going to be on the first line.
Yeah.
And it's going to be like, can Suzuki handle the physicality? Can Caulfield handle the physicality? And can Slavkovsky, is he experienced enough to understand how to use his without taking penalties, slowing his feet down, the stuff we've seen him screw up in the past?
Right.
But that's I think that's the headline matchup for me. It might be different when it goes back to Montreal and St. Louis can kind of maneuver his way around it. But I would presume it's going to be the Dubois line going up against Suzuki.
What that also does is give the top line an opportunity to go up against either. There's no either. It's the Alex Newhook line, and that's terrifying. I hate that. Much skill and cycling ability, especially against a completely inexperienced guy like Demidov, a guy who doesn't really give a crap about 5-on-5 defense in line A, and then Newhook, who does his best but isn't that guy. That scares the crap out of me.
It cannot be Alex Newhook's line. Now the problem,
but
is
in games 1 and 2, 5 and 7, who has last change?
So actually, this was a funny thing I was looking at, is the percentage of defensive zone starts among Montreal Canadiens skaters. And unsurprisingly, Patrick Laine is basically at the bottom of this list. Suzuki, Caulfield, Slav, they're in the 40s, like 40%. The second line basically is in the 25 to 30% range. And then obviously Evans, poor guy, it's at like 70%. Same goes with Dvorak, it's around 60%. There's not going to be a defensive zone draw unless it's an icing that does not have one of Evans, Suzuki. I don't think Alex Newhook's taking any defensive zone draws on the road.
Okay, right.
You can't have that Strome line go up against Newhook at any point. And let me look, it's going to happen in the flow of the game. But like, if you can avoid it, you avoid it. The problem is your backup options are a third line that's had a 25% expected goal percentage over the last 4 games and has struggled mightily. And a Jake Evans line that, while we love them and they showed a bit of spark, you can't play them 18 minutes.
No, of course not. You can't match them all game, minute for minute. No, because there's no counter there. One of the things that a defensive line does against the top line most effectively is counter and then keep the puck in the offensive zone by cycling, and they're not capable of that. So that's I don't love this. I had a much better feeling when we were talking about Thompson's recent numbers than about the matchups. Do you think that, so you were actually, let's go to this. You were talking about the defensive zone starts, which is also really interesting. That's all well and good, but that first line they're no chumps at the rush game either. They're really good on the rush too. So that's frightening as well, because maybe you put the second line out there because you're in the offensive zone and suddenly Alex Newhook loses the draw, and about 14 seconds later the puck's in the back of your net because they just went on a 3-on-2 counter. So
and that's the issue right now. The Habs rush defense has been really poor the past 10 games or so. Yes. And we've talked about it. We've seen it. Like I don't know how you're really going to counter that. Like, you have to be a little bit more physical where you can. And I'm wondering if Jack Eye's in the lineup by the time this series comes back to Montreal. It might even be in game 2. It might get to a point where you need to bring in Jack Eye's physicality, maybe to counterbalance. Like, if you're just looking at hits per 60, the Canadiens vastly out hit the Capitals. Okay. But I think what we're anticipating in this postseason here is that the Capitals are going to not like target. I'm going to say the word target, like not in like a malicious way.
Right.
Well, it's the playoffs. You got to you're going to hit people. And there's three small guys in Demidov, Caulfield, and Hudson that you'd be a little bit worried about. Maybe what does Jack-Eye entering the lineup do? The question about rush defense is you have four defensemen you trust. And the problem with one of those defensemen, Lane Hudson, and when he pairs with Gooley, is those guys are going to really be going after it offensively. How much can you tell Matheson and Carrier, you guys can't pinch at all? Because this is the issue. I don't know if they're going to match, but I wonder if you try to match maybe the defensive pairs with the Strome line.
Okay.
And even then, I don't have a good answer for you because are you putting Matheson Carrier out there and just saying you guys can't pinch at all? And you just I don't know. I don't trust that line. And then it's are you going to give that responsibility to Lane Hudson and Caden Gooley all of a sudden? It's not that this team, the Habs aren't going to be able to score goals. And this, I feel like maybe we're building up the Capitals a bit too much here. But the point is they have two dynamite lines at the top of their lineup. The bottom six is fairly decent. Lars Eller, like we mentioned, is in there. The defense, incredibly well balanced as well. They have 5 of their 6 players are between 19 and 23 minutes. Boy, what does that feel like? Because I don't know what that vibe is like.
Right.
Carlson, Chikrin, they have all different types of defensemen. No super duper stars, but a lot of guys can get the job done. And they're just incredibly balanced and well built. And those two lines scare me. Their weakness is in net, which was not the case in the first half of the year, but it is the case now.
Definitely. I want to get into the reasons why I'm picking the Canadiens in 4. So should we go over to our predictions?
Yeah.
How cold have the Capitals been when they've been idling? They've just sort of, okay, we're comfortable in a spot. It's a common trope, and I don't know how true it is. I like to think that it is to an extent, but it's a common trope that teams that have to fight tooth and nail like the St. Louis Blues did a number of years ago to go on a tear just to make the playoffs end up doing better in the postseason because they're used to battling every single night. Whereas a team who coasts in, like the Capitals did, might be at risk of being a little bit apathetic to start a series.
Here's the thing. So we are recording while the Caps are playing their last game of the season. They are currently losing. If they were to lose this game, they'd be 4-7-1 in their final 12 games of the season. That is not the form you want to go into, but they've also kind of been in no man's land when it comes to no one's been pushing them really over the last 3 weeks, 4 weeks. They had enough separation from Carolina that it didn't matter. And who cares about the President's Trophy? The Leafs weren't going to push them for number 1 in the East. I don't know. I haven't read the Athletic article that talks about, being cold or being hot going into the postseason, how much that matters. I don't think it matters too much, but the health, we talked about it with Protas and Thompson, that might be something that matters. We'll see. I do have a bit of a list here of if the Habs win, it'll be because of A, B, and C, and if they lose, it'll be because of A, B, and C. Let's do that, Brian, and then let's give our predictions and get out of here.
Sure, yeah.
I've written down 3 things for them to win. And I wanted to make sure I didn't just make dueling opposites. If they will win because Suzuki is great and then they will lose because Suzuki is not great. I wanted to make sure they were as different as possible.
Okay.
If the Habs win, it'll be because of A, goaltending is a clear advantage. Montembeault has been fantastic down the stretch for the most part, and the Caps have been wobbling. They will win because the top line remains dominant. We saw them come back to form. Slav had one of his best games of the season. Suzuki has been, I think he's 4th in the NHL in points. Again, final game, night of the regular season pending, but he's around 4th or 5th in the NHL in points since the Four Nations. And then the third one, and this is the wild card part, one non-first liner or Lane Hudson has a great offensive series.
Okay.
Now, you could tell me that's the Devo line, even though I'm pretty out on them right now. But if it's Demidov and suddenly we look up and it's game 6 and Demidov has 5 points in the series already. He has 3 goals and 2 assists. Or if you tell me Jake Evans has one of his heaters and he has 2 shorthanded goals in Washington in game 5.
Yeah.
Someone other than the 4 best players on the team, offensively at least, needs to do something. You'd think it'd be Demidov. It could be Patrick Laine. That could come back in the snap of a finger and he has 3 power play goals. That's what I think they need to have. If they win, it's going to be because all of those 3 things happen. What do you think?
I think that's right. I don't have much to add other than saying the guy you missed in terms of a non-Hudson player having a great offensive series, Caden Gooley scoring 2 goals a game. That's the other one. That's the
I'll
guy.
take that.
Yeah, no, but that's very well said, man. The top line has to play they have. Not only does Monty have to keep playing great, but Thompson also has to be bad. for lack of a better term. He can't go back to how he was at the start, because then that's a really tough series to win. I agree. What are the situations if the Habs lose? What will cause that?
So I've already hinted at one of them, and that is the physicality and the tempo change of the postseason. And we're going to ask this question once, and if they pass the test, I won't bring it up again. Hudson, Demidov, Caulfield in the postseason. I know we've seen Cole Caulfield already in the playoffs. Calm down. And I think just generally, I'm happy there's not like a veteran playoff team versus rookie playoff team vibe going. Like, yes, there are some guys making their debuts, but the Capitals haven't won a playoff series in 7 years.
Yeah. And they don't have that many members that have even ever had playoff experience, I don't think.
It's fairly limited. Like, it's not, I'm sure, like, look, Ovechkin has a truckload of experience, so we're not going to take that away from him. So is Tom Will. Like, they won those four, I think there's 4 guys left with Carlson, Wilson, Ovechkin, and then I'm blanking on the 4th guy. Oh, Lars Eller. They were all there in 2018. Beyond that, like, it's not too dissimilar than what the Canadiens have with Suzuki's been in a cup final, Anderson, Gallagher, Savard, Newhook. Like, there's tons and tons of guys. Anyways, but it's all of a sudden the game's slowing down. There's more physicality. We get to game 5 or 6 and they're letting more stuff go by. How do those guys deal with it? That's one. 2, I've talked about, it's the Dvorak line. If they continue to stink at 5-on-5,
okay,
especially if they're getting bad matchups, if they get pinned in for 1 minute and 45 seconds against the Dylan Strome line, that's bad news if that continues to happen. Yeah. And the third one, and this is similar to the Devo one, where it's like it's been a trend already and I don't want it to continue, is power play. The power play just continues to go ice cold, and they're just keep trying to like feed Patrick Laine. I don't know. It's in a weird funk right now where all their like the brains on that power play are just like, they're short fusing. Like, they don't know what to do other than like, oh, we got to go to Laine. And that's because they don't know where to put Suzuki. They don't know where to put Caulfield. It's just been a little awkward of late. And if Laine's shot isn't there to save him, that's not like, if this series goes by and the Habs lose in 5 and the power play is 1 for 11, it won't be a surprise.
Yeah, all 3 of those I agree with. I have 2 to add for this if the Habs lose, and I've mentioned them ad nauseum before when talking about when the Montreal Canadiens have gone through bad stretches, what caused it. Number 1 is just letting guys into the slot. Poor zone coverage, especially in the low slot, has been just brutal at times this season, and that will cause those top 2 lines especially, but even the 3rd and 4th line, because that's a way anybody can score. Just sneaking into the slot, standing there waiting for a pass, easy. You gotta nip that in the bud. And then lack of discipline, because it's one thing if both teams are taking like 4 or 5 penalties a game. But if after games 1, 2, and 3, it's like 16 opportunities for the Capitals and about 8 for the Canadiens, because the Capitals reeled it in and the Canadiens didn't, advantage Washington, and they're winning the series. It might be 3-0 by that point. So I agree with you. The power play for the Canadiens is important. The 3rd line has to be good, and we can't lose our young, skilled, smaller players in the physicality fog, but those other 2 are important as well. Ready for predictions?
Yeah, let's do it. I am still waffling between the number of games, but I haven't. Are you ready to say it while I still kind of backpedal and try to figure out last second what I want to do?
I can. I have 2 answers. I have my head answer and my heart answer.
Classic Brian. I wouldn't expect anything less.
And both are Canadiens in 6.
Oh my God. Jeez.
I'm serious. I'm serious. Habs in 6, you. Buddy. Yeah. Here we go.
Habs in 6. We will become so incredibly insufferable if that is the case. I'm telling you right now, if it's Habs in 6 and somehow Leaf Sens is in a game 7, you will have one fan base trolling 2 fan bases at the same time.
And whoever wins, it's hilarious.
That would be incredible. You are writing fan fiction, I believe, but good for you.
Pretty
I'll
much.
be rooting for that. I'm rooting for Habs in 4.
Of course.
So I'm between Caps in 5 and Caps in 6. I think the first 2 lines on the Caps is a really big deal, and I think they're going to give a lot of problems to the Suzuki line. And look, the Suzuki line's been awesome this year, and I think they'll get out of it, and they're still going to be the most productive guys. It will not surprise me if when the series ends, the top 3 players in points are Suzuki, Caulfield, and Slavkovsky. Having said that, there's 3 other lines, and the second line has been an odyssey. It has just been unresolved all season. Whatever Demidov can do, we'll take. He is the number one wild card of this series. Third and fourth line have not been consistent enough over the last 3 weeks or so, 2-3 weeks or so. And at this point, I don't know how much you can rely on them. On the back end, they've just been getting burned on pace and getting pucks in behind defensemen. And then that just starts a cycle chance and they get kind of killed. Washington's very well suited to play that type of style. Montembeault is, I feel like we've kind of danced around it. We haven't talked too much about him, but like first playoff round for him as ever, right? Like it's a brand new test for him. We can't just assume he's going to be 905, 910, 915, 34 saves on 35 shots, something like that. But at the same time, this Washington team hasn't really proven it. They've had missed the playoffs in 2 of the past 3 seasons. They haven't won a round since 2018. Their goaltending has been dreadful for the past 2.5 months. Their first line right winger is currently injured. We'll see how effective he is if he comes back. So there's some holes in there. Ultimately, I'm going to go with Capitals in 6.
Okay.
I don't feel great about it, but I think that's kind of the right move. Like, this is not a traditional 1v8 where like I've said at the beginning, like it's not a traditional 1 because I don't think they're as good as a typical 1 seed, nor do I think the Canadiens are as good as a typical 8 seed. But that's also like not typical 8 seeds don't have a 90 point. I know he didn't get to 90, but a 90 point first line center, a 60 plus point defenseman, and then a 19-year-old, not even rookie that might be the best player on the ice in game 4 and just win it. So I'm going with Caps in 6. Hurts me to say it, but I think that's where we're at. So we're both on the record with that. Brian, any final words before we wrap the episode? I will say we're going to be continue the post-game episodes going forward. There might be an opportunity for an extra long episode here and there where there's an extra off day, but for the most part, people should be ready for us to have an episode up after game 1, after game 2, and on and on and on. So with that out of the way, Brian, anything else you want to say before we wrap?
All I want to say, because you always get to say it and I want to say it for once because we're about to hit the playoffs, go Habs go.
Yeah, let's wrap it. Social media, Habsland Pod. We're in the playoffs. Full Bell Center building. People are going to bring it. I know people are going to travel to the US. If you do so, please, please, please be safe. Root for Demidov, root for Suzuki, Hudson, Caulfield, Slav, Gooley. These are wild times. It's amazing they've made it here already. Let's enjoy this postseason. Let's take in all the information, celebrate the team. Until after game 1 of the playoffs, go Habs.